Hi, Francis. My name is Laura Stoner, and I'm here with Danny Flakes and Paige Newman, and we're here interviewing you at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, and we're talking about your service in Vietnam for the Red Cross. So I wanted to ask you, what is your full name?
Frances Olive Stewart.
And where were you born?
Actually, Washington, D.C., but I'm from Arlington. They didn't have so many hospitals back there
Uh-huh.
in 44. Local doctors had to all take X number of servicemen's pregnant wives, and that's how
How?
it was during World War II.
Okay. So you had to go to Washington, D.C. You were from Arlington, but you had to go to D.C.
Right, it's right next door.
And was your father in the service?
Not then. He had been in World War II. He worked for the Department of the Army and the Department of Defense, and he was actually on a task force with the topic of Vietnam. He was in logistics,
Okay.
and he traveled to army bases all over the world, and Vietnam was also in that group.
Was one of them. What were your parents' names?
Maxcy, M-A-X-C-Y, Odell, and Olive Cullinane Stewart. Well, yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
It was Olive Frances Cullinane Stewart.
Okay. So you were named after
Yes.
your mother.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any siblings?
Mm-hmm. I had an older brother, Douglas, no middle name, and a younger brother, Kenneth, no middle name. I didn't have one to begin with. I added it myself.
Oh, oh, fun.
My dad thought, he didn't like his names. And he says, well, you all can make up a middle name and go by that if you want.
I kind of like that idea of
Yeah.
having control later on. So what year were you born?
44.
44. It's towards the end of World War II. You were
Right.
born.
And my dad was working in a munitions plant on the border of Tennessee and Virginia. I think he was assembling pistols, I'm not sure. And he decided to enlist. He was deferred. And I think it wore on him after a while. So he enlisted, and they fixed his basic training and then his transport to Europe, so that he could be in Washington during my delivery.
Oh, that was kind.
Yeah. So I was induced.
You were induced to come
Yeah.
out. So then, where did you go to high school?
In Arlington.
In
I
Arlington.
was one of the few kids who raised their hands when they said, who's been here all through school?
Because it was such a transient
Yes,
population
yes.
of people
And
circulating.
lots the military.
Mm-hmm. So then, when you finished high school, did you know that you were going to go to college, or?
Yes,
Mhm.
it was always certainly my parents' desire, but it was mine too. I wanted to be a physical education teacher.
Did you love physical education in your, high school and middle school and?
Yeah, I
Primary.
played all kinds of sports, and unfortunately, Arlington didn't have varsity sports for girls, so I played at a high level of recreation for softball, basketball.
Mhm. So what school did you choose to pursue that?
I went to Longwood College, which is now a university.
And did you, was that kind of a culture shock for you going out to Farmville?
It was nothing like Arlington. And mostly in those days, the girls who wanted to go to teachers' college, and there weren't a lot of options of where to go for girls, if they were from our area, they'd go to Madison. And if they were from the south of Virginia, they would go to Longwood. I had a teacher who promoted Longwood to me, so that's how I happened to end up there.
So what year did you graduate from high school?
62.
62. And then you spent 4 years at Longwood?
Mm-hmm.
And did you enjoy the curriculum?
Not the curriculum, I enjoyed all the activities and the sports. I think Arlington was ahead of the rest of the state at the time, and so I could do very little and get C's, which I chose to do a lot of the time. But in my major, I wanted A's, but that's the only place I really worked.
Uh-huh. And so you graduate in 66, I
Yes.
assume. And how is the were you aware of Vietnam and the draft and how it was affecting people around? Were your brothers drafted at all? Did they do any service?
I, somewhere in there, my older brother, who was draft age, had to take a bus to Richmond with all these other guys and have a physical.
Mm-hmm.
And he had had a bleeding ulcer as a teenager and had a opening all the way up his, that deferred him.
Yeah, I can imagine that you wouldn't want to put any
Yes.
stress on that.
And how I became aware of what was going on in Vietnam was while I was at Longwood, several of us that were PE majors all went to Washington for a conference of the American Association of Physical Education and Recreation. And while we were there, we stayed at my house. I think there was a carload of us. And it was over at the Shoreham. It was a nice conference. And I lost my train of thought now.
You became aware of the Vietnam
Yeah,
War.
what happened while we were there was one of the things you do in PE is learn folk dance, things like that. So we were having a folk dance at one point, and
Is this co-ed? This conference, is it co-ed?
yes,
Okay.
it is. And so there were some men there that were going to be drafted soon, so they were very aware, and they spoke to us some about that, and that is what really got it on my awareness.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that they were anxious?
Yes.
Or
Very anxious.
was it more about just being drafted and not knowing what is going to happen? Or do you think it was the service in Vietnam and the threats of
Mm-hmm. I think
military?
it was both, but more in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. So you graduate from Longwood,
Mm-hmm.
and did you teach in physical education?
I taught 1 year in Fairfax County, and they really did me in. They had me sign a contract that said I would teach biology and PE, and I had a biology minor. That wasn't the point. It was that they gave me all biology classes. The kids were 7th graders, and I'd never thought about teaching boys.
Uh-huh.
And those boys were quite a handful. And they had the classes, the highest and then on down. And the lowest were full of young black kids who were from a not great background, and white kids that weren't making it for one reason or another. They were economically okay, but they were not.
Applying themselves.
Yes. So it was a terrible experience. And when I said to my principal that I'm in over my head here, I need some help, he says, well, you're a first-year teacher. I don't think they do that with teachers these days.
Uh-huh. So he just felt like you should just tough it out, that it would get
I
better.
would tough out that year, but I wasn't going to stay. It never occurred to me that I could quit in the middle of something I agreed to.
And was there any promise that the physical education position might open up for you in the future there, or?
If it was at that school, I wouldn't go. But in Arlington or Fairfax, I thought there was a good chance, but that wasn't what was on my mind at the time. I had decided I wanted an adventure.
Uh-huh.
And my parents both knew about this program of the Red Cross and encouraged me to look into it.
Because they knew that you were so unhappy with
Yes. That
the
I could,
position.
right, do something else for a while. And it was recreation, so it was sort of in my field.
Let's pause for a second. Can you, is your phone, I hear a whistle.
It's like a train.
It does. I was like, whoa. That's a new noise for this room.
Yeah, I get it. Okay.
Frances says that she lived in Ashland for 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
Do you live in Ashland?
No, I don't, but I was just on I took Amtrak last Friday. And yeah, I always like, oh, you just jump in on the train and just go to Ashland instead of driving. I know. I don't know how much a ticket would be.
We took our granddaughter recently on a train ride from Richmond to Ashland. My son and daughter were on the train with my partner Wendy, and I drove out there and met them.
So you didn't take the train?
Not that trip. My son is a train buff for sure, and so I've taken many a train.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll start.
Thank you.
Okay, so your parents knew about the Red Cross program, which can you enlighten me, because I'm trying to remember in all of my notes, because it had an official title, it was like SRAO.
Supplemental recreational activities overseas.
Okay, overseas. And they had a colloquial name of donut dollies that stemmed from World War II, and that they would make donuts for people in the field.
Right, and I brought a book with me that has just come out called Goodnight Irene, and it's about this man, the authors, coming across his mother's records from World War II and researching, because nobody talked about what they did. They drove 2.5-ton trucks right behind the front lines.
And
So this is a wonderful book. I recommend you get it for the library here.
yeah, definitely we can look into it. But to say that, I mean, this service has a long history of cooperating with the military to provide assistance to soldiers in combat.
Right, and another duty of the Red Cross is to do emergency communications for, like, this happened to me, but my parents were in a bad automobile accident, and near the time for me to go home, they tried to make it without me and couldn't, so they called for me. And what you do is you call your Red Cross chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and they send someone out and check to see if it's a legitimate request. And then they send the information to, in this case, Saigon.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So that's one of the duties of the Red Cross. There was another one that flitted through my head. I can't think of it right now. And not just able-bodied service, but service to hospitals.
And disabled veterans.
Yes, or not veterans, but the guys that were in the hospital, like I worked at Walter Reed for 2.5 years, just home from Vietnam, and amputations and all kinds of things that kept them there a long time.
Yeah. So your family knew of this program and they suggested it to you. So that you applied.
Yes.
You had to apply, and you had to be a college-educated woman, single, and 21 to 24.
I think it was in there, although I knew of 1 or 2 exceptions that were a little older.
Did they? Were you allowed to? Did they? In general, did they kick you out when you were 24? Were they like, you're too old for the program, or could you age with it?
We just went for a year, so didn't have to worry about that.
Okay. So, you applied for it while you were working at the school, or?
Actually, I think it was summertime. No, it wasn't summertime, because I went for an interview with the Army Special Services, which is a very similar task, but Red Cross would go into a place that didn't have up to snuff offices and things like that. We would go in a tent and stuff like that. So I went to an interview with the
Special services.
and one of the things that's really petty, but I didn't like their uniform.
So what are the difference between the Red Cross uniform and the Special Services uniform?
They were kind of a darkish blue, and they just reminded me of something my mother would wear. And ours were those little blue dresses that worked fine.
They were kind of powdered blue,
Yes, they were.
and
Had a belt that snapped, or else it had a clip on it, something. It was a no-nonsense uniform, but it worked well.
so was that your deciding factor between the two groups?
Well, I don't know if it was my deciding factor. I knew I wanted to do something, and actually the people that I was interviewed by and interfaced with in the Red Cross, I just felt were more attuned.
To what you wanted
Yes.
to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know anyone else who had gone in?
No, I didn't. Although I understand, I just read something that said 3 girls from Mary Baldwin went. I had no idea. And, Mary Baldwin isn't that far from Farmville.
Yeah, and a girls' school. So
Yes, another girls' school.
So when do you find out that you are accepted to the program and you will start training?
I think I found out in late May or early June. And
Would that be 69 or
67.
67? Okay, sorry.
And they said they had a training class coming up in late June or middle June for 2 weeks. Or there was another one that was going to be in July. And I chose the July one just because I like to get ready for something.
You wanted to have some downtime before you went into this.
Before it took off.
So the understanding was like 2 weeks of training, and then you're going to into Vietnam.
Yes.
Okay. And your family is excited for you because
Of course, my father knew the ins and outs of the Pentagon. He told me where to come and park and go into this place and get all my shots. We needed tons of shots, free. If everybody could get them for free, but weren't necessarily near a place that was giving them.
malaria.
Yeah.
So you went and got a bunch of shots. No, what was the 2 week training was in Washington D.C.?
What was what?
The training was in Washington
Yes,
D.C.
it was at the headquarters building of the Red Cross, which is close to the White House.
Okay. And did you? How many people were in your class?
I think there were 42 or so of us, which maybe was the biggest class they ever had, and I don't think they had one that big again. And a portion of us went to Korea. You could, when you sign up for Vietnam or Korea. And that didn't interest me. It didn't have the excitement.
It wasn't as much of an active
Yes.
military
Right. Right.
incursion. So did you stay somewhere as a group, or did you?
Yes, I think the hotel was called the Hotel Washington, and it was a middle-level hotel, within walking distance of headquarters. And so we walked back and forth and mostly ate in government cafeterias in government buildings, and because they were inexpensive, and we were given $3 a day to eat on. So we had to make it go a long way.
Stretch it. Did you, so, like, did the group socialize together, or, I mean, like, did there seem to be good camaraderie around the group?
A lot of the original socializing, I don't know if anybody in my group came from the same place and were friends. I'm not aware of that. But mostly with your roommates or the room next door was how.
Mm-hmm. How it broke out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They housed us alphabetically and sit in the room alphabetically, so.
You made friends with
Yes,
the people that were nearby.
Had a last name starting with W.
Did, was the class integrated?
No. In fact, I had very little experience with integrated schools. None at Longwood, and my senior year at Wakefield High School in Arlington. We did, yes, we did, because after we got into our hotel, my parents had taken me and dropped me off. I decided I wanted my car. I was leaving my car at home for the year. So I took a bus out to Arlington after work and got my car, and then I could take people sightseeing, doing fun things. And I don't know if you have heard of this ice cream parlor. It was, I'll think of it later,
Yeah,
the name of it. There was one in Silver Spring, Maryland, and there was one in Arlington. And I said, let's go there. It's just great. And one of the women that went on that trip was black.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think of anything of it. Well, you know how white privilege goes. I wasn't aware of a lot of the,
Social
yeah.
regulations.
Right, and so we go into this place I've been in many times, and I didn't notice at first that we were making any kind of there must have been 5 of us, and I guess they determined that we weren't going to be in trouble and served us. And when I realized later, because Barbara talked about it some, she was aware of every step along the way.
Barbara was the black
Yeah,
Red Cross trainee.
yes.
Do you remember her last name, or?
No, not right off.
Okay. It's okay.
Mhm.
So she noticed it, so she commented after the fact
Yes,
that
when we were driving
she felt
back.
uncomfortable.
Yes.
Okay.
So that was a really good experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a household that wasn't particularly, certainly weren't prejudiced, although my dad's family from South Carolina were. And my mom grew up in the cavalry, as a cavalry brat out in the Southwest,
Mm-hmm.
around a lot of Hispanics. And neither of them had any kind of negative things to say. And if I said something because somebody taught me this rhyming thing that had a bad word, like, I remember the one that had nigger in it, my mother said, we don't use that word, you know. So I was clearly, I was thankful for what I got.
Yeah. But also it probably could have made you a little naive to the issues that
Yes, oh,
Black
it
people
did. I
face.
was naive. When I was old enough and realized when we went to South Carolina that we went to a movie, and the black folks had to sit upstairs. And I asked a kid that was my age about that, and I said, oh yeah. You know, we didn't do that in Arlington.
Mhm.
Or have the drinking fountains two different qualities. I saw things I hadn't seen before. And the woman that worked for my aunt, both in home and in her business, I think she called me Francie when I was really young, but then it was Miss Francis. And I said, no, I'm not Miss Francis. And she said, I have to call you that. I'm sorry.
Mm.
So it was clear to me, lots of discrimination.
Mhm. So, but you would say that the statistics on black women joining the Red Cross group is it's a small group?
Yeah, it's a small subgroup, although I think the Red Cross was very open because there were so many black troops. But I don't think they probably knew how to do it.
Mhm. How to recruit
Yes,
those women.
yes.
So what were they training you in those 2 weeks?
That's kind of the mystery. What was the phrase that we often ask questions about, well, blah, 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 and they'd say, well, it depends. So, and indeed one day they had a couple of volunteers come in and do a program with us. And a program was, one of those pictures in that thing shows a woman with a prop bag in her hand as she's getting out of a helicopter.
Uh-huh.
We carried those big prop bags and we made quiz shows, like on TV, like concentration. So we'd make a concentration board and then have a theme. I made one, my first program that I made was on football because it was fall and I knew a lot about football and I knew the guys would like football. So and then the team, I work a team and my partner works a team. And of course we're trying to win. You don't win anything except satisfaction. But it was fun.
Uh-huh.
And I forget what I was saying.
What the training, you had the people that came in,
And ran one of these
workshop, kind of like
yes,
workshopping the
program, is
Uh-huh.
what it's called, with us. And so we got to see, well, that's what we're going to do. Isn't that a little silly? Or isn't that a little... And it took a long time to really realize it. And in this book about World War II, those young women came to the same realization over a long period of time that just being a touch of home, and we had to have something, you know, we couldn't just stand there. So running a quiz show worked.
Mm-hmm. Took people's minds off of.
Yes, they'd have a break for an hour or two while we were there.
Did you ever, like, was there training on like how to get off a helicopter or no?
No, and I got motion sick before I went to Vietnam. I overcame that pretty quickly because I loved flying in helicopters.
That was just something you just kind of, they were like, get in the helicopter and get out.
It's not very hard. It's just a high step up, which when you're 22 isn't a big deal. And you have more than enough men around who want to give you a hand up.
Okay, so you do your training and it's more about the program aspect of...
And some history of the Red Cross. The Red Cross has a spotted history about having sold cigarettes and coffee. I think those are the main two during World War II. And the Red Cross has documentation that says that Americans were the only ones giving out free stuff like that, and the British and the French didn't appreciate it, so they asked
For a donation.
the U.S. to charge a little.
Oh,
a
to
little
charge,
bigger. So, you know, I can understand people being really put out by being charged.
So they wanted you to be aware of that.
Right, they wanted us
history.
to be able to know that it had happened, and if we wanted to, we could say that other part or just let it go.
Mm-hmm. And were there any rules?
There were lots of rules. It was like going to a girls' school. We had to be in by 11, I think, at night. We had to have the length of our skirt down to the middle of our knees. There were tons of rules.
You weren't allowed to associate with the socialize. I mean, I don't know how you would phrase it. I guess be romantically involved with the
That
soldiers.
was okay.
You could be romantically involved.
Right, it was discouraged, but that, I think inevitably things like that are gonna happen. They made it very clear we were not to be sexually active for the whole year. What else? And if found out, we would get sent home. That was the big penalty if you did something that really was out of a sense of, that would take away the image that they wanted to
Project.
Yes. So,
And I feel like someone told me that if you got sent home early, you had to pay your way home. I don't know if you.
I never heard that. I don't think that that's true, but,
Okay.
you know, I was there in the very early part.
Mm-hmm.
Things evolved. Like I heard some people say they had to pay for their uniforms. We didn't.
Mm-hmm. So basically, it was like a year of you got paid, but there were no expense. You didn't really have expenses because they fed you and you clothed you.
Right. The first place I was in a rear area, and we ate in the chow hall, in the officers' chow hall, and it was a very inexpensive fee. But when I moved to be around infantry divisions, there wasn't any charge.
Okay. So you finished your 2 weeks training,
Mm-hmm.
and then do you go directly to Vietnam, or do you? How was the travel to Vietnam, like the flight? Did you?
They took us by bus out to Dulles. And I think the girls going to Korea went on a different flight because they went through Seattle and we went through San Francisco. So that was pretty exciting, just flying to San Francisco. And then they did some processing at the chapter there in San Francisco. We had several days to do whatever we wanted in, you know, I'd never been to California or San Francisco, so it was really exciting. So I'm getting some of the adventure
That you were looking for.
Yeah, that I wanted. And we went up to, I think it was a little ferry that went up over to, what's the prison that's in the middle of the...
Alcatraz.
Yeah, Alcatraz. And so we were standing in line, and that time of year, San Francisco's chilly. And we came from Virginia or Washington. And so we were given London fog, dark blue raincoats that had a patch on them, or we put the patch on them. And so this man comes out and says, "Are you all in a group?" And we said, "Well, I guess you could say." She said, "You'll get a discount."
Did you experience any, when you were in San Francisco? You know,
Any what?
in San Francisco, did you experience any counterculture, you know, people protesting against the war? I mean, I know that was only a few days, so.
Yeah. We were in a bus one day that went by a park that was one of the, I don't know that it was Haight-Ashbury, but something along those lines. And, you know, I was just dying to see what the people looked like out there. They looked like we did, maybe longer hair. Not wearing villager apparel, but
They, So that was the first time you'd kind of seen the hippie
yes, yes.
culture.
Yes,
And had you been on a plane before when you flew to?
I had,
Okay, so.
briefly. And I loved the song by the Mamas and the Papas, If You're Going to San Francisco.
Oh, that must have been fun.
Yeah,
So you get processed in San Francisco, and then you get on a plane and you go.
we get a bus out to Travis Airport Base, Air Force Base, which is an hour or two outside the city. And we get on a plane with, I think we had assigned seats, and it was a Army, what do you call it?
Transport.
It wasn't an Army plane. Oh, are we gonna have
A thunderstorm.
so it was a chartered flight, and the airline was Braniff. I remember because I'd seen commercials for Braniff, and they changed outfits, and so that was another.
Excitement.
Yeah.
So you had like flight attendants and.
Yes, and all around us were GIs in uniform. We were in uniform as well. We had hats that we didn't like, and so whenever we could get away without wearing those hats, we did.
Did you have to? They were kind of like little. I don't know how to describe them. Like a.
Okay, like that, but just went up here on your head.
They had like a brim, right? And no.
Not really a brim, but a rounded off. Maybe, you know, I haven't seen one in so long, and I don't know that I have any pictures.
Did you have to like pin them into your hair, or did
No,
they stay naturally?
kind of fit towards the back. I think you could use bobby pins, but you know, I wasn't going to keep it on that long.
This is kind of a off the wall question, but were any of the women who joined this program concerned about how they were going to keep, you know, like this is the age when people are getting their hair set once a week, you know, like are these women thinking about the humidity and like how they're going to maintain their hair?
Well, I've been looking at some old pictures, and I think there was a lot of short hair, more incidences of it than was typical at that time, because the short hair would be easy
To care for them.
and you weren't supposed to have it on your neck. So either up or ponytail or short.
Okay. So you're on the plane and you're wearing your, you did not have to wear your hat on the plane?
No,
So you were-
when you're indoors, you don't have to wear it anyway.
Okay. So you were excited to be on the plane because there's no hat involved. And you're going, where do you go?
Okay, we go to Hawaii.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it was Hawaii International. I think it was Air Base in Hawaii. And, you know, they refueled. It was a break.
But you didn't get to go out.
No. So we looked, you know.
Looked out the window.
And then we went from Hickam, I think is the name of the base, to a base in Guam. Same thing there. And that was a really long flight between those two points. And, you know, we were getting very tired and very weary, and it was hard to sleep when you're so excited and don't know what's coming. I don't think they had movies back then. So we get to Guam, and I think we were able to get off the plane. And a lot of the bombing Air Force bombers and jets came out of Guam and there's another, Okinawa, no, it wasn't Okinawa. Anyway, another,
Island.
yes. And so, you know, that's the first I knew of that. And then we were rounded up and put back on the airplane and told that when we got near Saigon, we were going to take a, I don't know whether it was a special landing where we would come in high and then go low quickly.
A fast descent.
Yes, like an assault. So, you know, it was about this time that my first fear happened. I thought, wow, I'm really doing this. I'm really going into a war zone. They're maneuvering the plane so we won't get hit on the way in. So that caused some second thoughts on my part, but I banished those. I'm real good at focusing on what's right here and leaving that for other times. And we landed at an airbase called Tan Son Nhut that was very small. And dust all around, no greenery, nothing, you know. And then we got onto buses, army buses that had open windows, but they had grills, whatever you call them, that if somebody wanted to throw something at you, you couldn't come through the window. Well, hearing that was another thing to make me take pause.
Aware of your well-being.
Yeah.
Was there any impression about the smells that you encountered when you landed?
You know, I don't remember smells at that time. I do remember other places where the guys burned the refuge and it smelled bad. So
what time of year is this now? When you're
it's summer,
it's summer.
but they have either the monsoon or the non-monsoon. It's not it's still hot.
Yeah, it's always hot.
So
So you're on the bus.
yeah, and they take us to the hotel we're going to, which had things like you squatted on the floor to
For the
through a
restroom.
hole to pee and things like that, which was all very fascinating to us. And not the first night, because we were all dead tired. You lose a day when you travel in one direction to halfway around the world, and then you gain it back coming home. So we all wanted to sleep, get our room assignments and sleep. And then the next day we would get assigned, tell what our assignments were for duty. And then the second night, our directors told us that we had been invited to a party. And who was at the party, I think, were civilians who were assigned there, American civilians, and officers, high up officers. You know, it's like we're... So, we went to this party, which was not interesting at all. People were drinking. They weren't drunk. It just wasn't, you know, anything happening. So...
Were you expected to wear your uniforms at the party, or
I
did you
don't
wear
think
civilian?
we wore them at the party. And then a couple of the young women and me decided we were going to leave, you know, we'd had enough. And so somebody said, "Do you know how to get home?" And I said, "No, but I saw map downstairs. So we got a map out, and I charted the way to get home. It never crossed my mind that I might take us through bad neighborhoods, getting the quickest way home. And a couple of them were dicey, but we did all right.
So there was no warning about like, don't go
No.
this place.
No, nothing like that.
And it's a city, it's
Oh,
not a
right.
base.
It's a big city with a lot of noise, a lot of motors, a lot of motorcycles, which I think are more noisy than cars. But also mixed in are much lower going vehicles. You know, it was it wasn't like it was in the United States.
And you went home on foot.
Yes, we walked home.
Okay.
I didn't even think about calling a cab or anything like that. My cab taking was very limited. A couple of times when I was with my grandmother in DC, I took a cab.
Uh-huh. I mean, calling a cab in a whole nother country is, you know, different.
So then I think it was the next morning, we had a meeting and they gave us our assignments, duty assignments. And I was assigned to Quinyan, which is a city. So the DMZ, you know, is halfway. Below the DMZ, the biggest city is Da Nang. And then, I don't know whether it's 100 miles or what, is Quinyan. It was sort of disappointing to be sent to this support base rather than where the action was, you know.
So did you want to be in the field, or are you talking about you want to be in a bigger city?
I wanted to, no, I wanted to be on a base where things were happening.
Okay.
And we ran a recreation center that was open from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. And the men at this support base, they said for morale, were 12 hours on, 12 hours off. So we didn't have to work 12 hours, but we worked some pretty long days. The recreation hall was open like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and went to 9 o'clock at night. Just a couple of us had to stay for the night
Shift.
Mm-hmm. My first time staying, I think by myself, I don't know how that happened, to run the center. I had been there with other girls. I realized a GI came up to me and said, "We're out of coffee." You know, we had these big, huge coffee mugs. And I thought, oh, I didn't drink coffee. My parents drank instant. You know, I did not know how you went about this. And this man that worked with us, a Vietnamese man named Vic, he made the coffee. So I went out, they had Connexes, you know what those are? They're like containers, what they call containers now. And we had a couple of Connexes out back storing this and that. And so I went out there and I got some coffee. And I don't think we had running water in this center. I think there was a hose out there or something. Well, there was no way I could carry that container after it was full. But I forget whether I read directions or what, but I made the coffee, you know, it had one of those filters with a long pole. That is
And the metal kind
yes,
of.
yes. So I measured how many cups of water I put in. Although I didn't have that thing, I put it right into the water. And this GI, who was really nice, came out and said, "How come it's taking you so long? What's going on here?" And I said, "You know, I don't know how to make coffee." He says, don't worry about it, I'll do it. So he rescued me. And things like that happened all the time. If we didn't know what we were doing, someone would come along who knew, and we're always cheerful and helpful. I don't think none come to mind, negative experiences with the GIs or Vietnamese civilians. You know, supposedly there was terrible drug use. I don't think it was there the year I was there, or else I was so naive that nobody wanted to tell me.
So going back to when you arrive,
Yeah.
what are your living arrangements like on the first base?
Okay, we were in air-conditioned trailers.
Sounds pretty nice.
Yes, across the road from a beach that was really pretty. We were told not to go swimming there. I guess they didn't have it patrolled. The trailers were okay. There was one bedroom. There were 3 bedrooms in each trailer, and each of us got one. The biggest one was significantly larger than the other 2. And there was a double bed in my smaller one that took up almost the whole room. I could come in the door and go sideways along the side of the bed to use the closet that was there.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say air-conditioned trailers, they weren't the height of luxury, but they were, compared to other things there, they were. And they'd had a kitchen in it. We tried cooking a couple of times. So in the morning, half hour or so before we were supposed to be at work, our driver would come with this truck. And the truck was kind of like a pickup, but with a large cab, so that 6 of us could easily fit in the
cab.
Yeah. And I can't remember that man's name. He was really, talk about a job you would want to have. Driving the Donut Dollies around was a good job.
He was in the military.
Yes, he was. He was a specialist Spec 4. And they didn't want us to drive. The Red Cross didn't. I don't think the service did either. Because, some of those women in World War II got surrounded by the Germans. Because they bumbled in, it was during the Battle of the Bulge. They bumbled into the wrong place.
Because they were so close to the front lines.
Yes. So they wanted us, someone was taking us where we were going. We weren't
Self-driving.
Yes.
So you get into the truck and
You go to the center where you pick up your stuff to go on your runs. And the runs there were almost all on the road. And sometimes soldier in a Jeep would come and take 2 of us in this direction. Our driver would take 2 of us in another direction, and then we probably had a 3rd vehicle and then it was mapped out so that after stop 1, the guy from stop 2 came and got us and took us on. So it was all very organized.
And you're taking like Kool-Aid and...
Not at that time.
Okay.
We were taking Kool-Aid. We were taking our prop bag.
Uh-huh.
And when we got to a place, a company, they would give the guys the time off to go to the chow hall and participate in our...
In your program.
Yes. And so we might have 5 of those. 5 would be a lot of those stops in a day.
So you're saying if you go out on the runs, then you're not going to be the person working in the
That's exactly
recreational
what,
center. So it's kind of like a
yes,
switching off of the duties.
yes,
Which one did you prefer? You
the runs.
because you were in the action.
Yes, and if we were doing something, we could see there were all kinds of little businesses along the road. And one of them that really amused me was a sign up that said, "Cars mashed here." And what it meant was cars washed here. They had the M upside down. So there were things like that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the little kids, until they were potty trained, they didn't wear anything but a t-shirt. And, you know, until they got it under control, didn't have to worry about diapers and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. So how long did you stay in?
Quignon,
Uh-huh.
I think it was 4 months. And meanwhile, Red Cross women were coming and going, you know, their time to go is here, or this one's time to go to another unit is here, you know. Things changed. And this good friend of mine, who I'm still friends with, Mary Jo, and I,
What's Mary Jo's last name?
Meryl.
Meryl.
Oh, no, it's Schenk now, S-H-E-N-K.
Meryl Schenk. Mary Jo Schenk.
Mary Jo Schenk.
Okay.
Schenk, yeah. We both were wanting change. And so I forget how the word came down. But about a month or so before we finally agitated enough to get sent somewhere, this woman who had been in Korea and then she'd been in another place near Saigon, and then she came to us. She was cool. She was our unit director. And things just changed when she was there. You know, it was just like a fun thing. Before it was like, so-and-so's in charge. Have you seen her? No, I haven't seen her. You know, it was not fun. So with Sarah, she said, "Do you all want to go to a leprosarium?" We said, "Sure. Where is one?" She'd found out. We went on a day off over to this place that nuns ran and saw
Okay, wait, say that again. Where did you go?
a leprosarium.
Is that
We're
like a
leprosy?
Yes.
It was like we went into another world when we went there. It was kind of isolated and very quiet.
Like you didn't have any sense that a war was
No.
a civil war was happening.
No. Except I did see a sign on the beach that said, "Don't go here." An Army U.S. sign, not a. Other things that Sarah would get us into were really, she got a run, you know, we hadn't been off the ground. She got us a run up the coast to, can't remember the name of the place now, that we were going to go by helicopter for the day and see this. It was the Marical division, you know, the division that had all that horrible stuff happen. The guy that, Lieutenant Calley, the GI that it was hung on, they killed a bunch of civilians.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, nobody higher up would take the blame, and they got it on this lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's because the units were not all of them were well designed and maintained. So we went for the day up there, and the first thing we saw were some guys coming down the road with what looked like suitcases. And it turned out that those were detectors of
bomb detection?
Yeah, on the road, so that they could clear the road, make sure the road was clear. You know, that was exciting. We were seeing things we hadn't seen before. So, things weren't as bad at Queen Yan as they had been. You know, I'm not talking about real bad, but, so I got sent to the 1st Division in Lai Khe, which was 60 kilometers north of Saigon, on a rubber tree plantation that the French had.
Uh-huh.
And we lived in an old French villa. Now, don't think it was so wonderful, but it's better than a tent.
Yeah.
We didn't have any screens, so the bugs could come in and out, and of course it's a very buggy place. There were 2 bedrooms, and there were 4 of us, 2 to a room. And then in the rest of the house, there was the room that our mamazan washed our clothes in and ironed them.
Tell me what a mamazan
A
is.
mamazan is I think it's a mama, but that was the name used for a woman who worked for you.
A
Mamazan.
Vietnamese woman.
Mm-hmm.
And did she just work your villa, or was it?
That was, we were the only ones. We were able to give her enough money that she was satisfied.
So do you know how, like, did the people who lived in the villa before hire her, and then you just?
I think she came with the villa and lost, unless you were really upset, you kept the same one.
Okay.
She was very nice, very confident,
Did she speak English, or did she?
very few words. We learned a few words of Vietnamese, like mamazan, although some of the words could have been from French.
Mm-hmm.
A lot was beaucoup from French. If you wanted someone to go quickly, you said, "Dini Mao." You know, so we learned,
Phrases.
yeah. So, and it had a ceiling fan. It reminded me of what I thought the tropics would be like. And then,
Did you sleep under netting?
no, we did not. So it was not infested with, they sent those trucks out on the roads with the bug spray on them. Did you ever, when I was a kid, did you ever see those? I used to go to Westmoreland State Park with my family, and at night those trucks would go around,
And spray.
yeah, and spray, and the kids would run behind the trucks. So they had that. They kept the roads, the dust and dirt down by oiling them or covering them with something called penapron or pitapron. I don't know what it was. But after it was put down, the truck would go along, and it was like they were putting this substance on the road, and it was a tar-like substance.
Is it coming out of a sprayer, or people physically putting?
No, a sprayer.
Uh-huh.
And if you happened to walk on the road soon after that, you would slip,
Oh.
because it was, until it dried, it was really slippery.
Did that help take care of the bugs?
No, that had nothing to do with it, but it helped keep the dust and dirt down.
Uh-huh. From coming in your windows.
Yeah, from everywhere in the camp.
Mm-hmm. So what was your day like when you entered that
Okay, let me
base?
just tell you one
Okay.
other little thing. When I took a helicopter into Lai Khe, unless you were in a convoy, you didn't drive in. And I started seeing these signs that said, danger, and then danger forward. Well, I knew I was going to an infantry division, so Well, what that was, was danger was the call sign for the whole First Division. And they had moved headquarters of the First Division to Like. So that's
So it was danger ahead.
forward.
Yes.
So a day there would be, we did have a recreation hall that was another villa, it was really nice. And we had runs, there were only 4 of us, so I guess there was 1 run a day in the center. Somehow it seemed free and easier going there than it had, the first place
It's a-
it was.
Uh-huh. And were your runs in more, did it feel like you were seeing more action in the runs?
Well,
Because
yes,
you were,
we were taking helicopters to forward artillery bases. And so they'd take us to a base that had all these artillery pieces, a company of them, and then a company of infantry on the boundary. And they shot those things from there, but only when they were under fire or something like that. I can't remember exactly where I was going with that. But
the helicopters?
the helicopters brought us in, and we often went in with a hot meal in these Mermac cans, the mail, sometimes a chaplain. You know, our helicopter was important. You know, guys like
Very
seeing
welcome.
that, all that. And so we would serve in the chow line just to be able to see more guys and speak to them when they came through. The guys who were on artillery pieces couldn't leave their pieces. So we went around and talked at each gun.
Were you able to get to know anybody? Like, did you see people regular enough that you'd be like, oh, there's Steve?
Really not, you know, every once in a while, but not much. Those guys might be in that base for a week or less, and then they tell them to go set up over here. And, you know, there was a lot of useless, my point of view, defense going on.
Did you enjoy the runs again more so than working in the rec
Yes.
center?
Yes.
And so then after like, hey, then you go,
Near Pleiku to the 4th Infantry Division. The
and how
only-
did, okay, keep talking about like, hey.
In January, so I'd been in country since July. I went on R&R to Hong Kong. And when I got back, that night the Tet Offensive started. So we got mortared sometimes, a few mortar rounds kind of thrown in, and if they killed somebody, it was by accident. It was just harassment.
Did they tell you to do anything to protect yourself from the mortars? Like, did they give you helmets, or were they like, get under your bed?
We all did have a steel pot, but we had, the back room of our house was our bunker and had a sandbagged area. We never, until then, had the steel pots out. So the sirens going off, which happened in this infantry division, it was not unheard of, and didn't think a lot of it. Well, then a went off, which meant a ground
Invasion.
invasion. So that got our attention, And we decided that we would go to our bunker. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. So we were back there in our bunker, and then some of the rounds, and rockets are coming in too, and they, so that's more scary than the mortars. We heard some explosives going off. It sounded like in the front of our house. We didn't know where it was going on. So we were on a bench, and one person here, one person here, one person there. And when we started hearing those, we all jammed up next to each other on the bench, and we put our steel pots on.
Are you talking about literal steel pots or not? Or is that what they call helmets?
That's what they call them.
Okay.
They, I forgot.
Okay, so you're all pushed together.
Right, and
Did someone come to the house?
after a while, it was a long time later before anybody in the military checked on us. When things like that are going on, we're more of a nuisance than a help, because
They wanted safety-wise.
yes.
Mhm.
So the company commander of headquarters company came by after it got light to see how we were.
You said there was an explosion that felt like it was in front of your
It
house.
felt like it was, so we're all crammed up in the thing, and this one young woman with us from Georgia says, the fear is that they're gonna come in and rape us. That's what's going on in our heads. We were very close to the perimeter, and there was a little village right outside the perimeter. We were close to headquarters of the division, a good target, 3rd Brigade of the division. All around us were good targets. So Gail runs out and says, "I'll be right back." And she comes back with this ceremonial sword that she got on R&R in Kuala Lumpur.
She's gonna defend you all.
Right. That's how, naive we were. But they did not clear our base for several days, and they, if you went to the chow hall, you had to stay in line 3 meters apart. So if a round came in, you'd only get one person. There were all sorts of things going on that didn't go on before, and part of why we were not needed. We were not going to give anybody an hour off for it.
They were all working.
Yes,
all
they
the
were.
time.
Yeah. So we got evacuated to Zion, that's D-I-A-N, and it's another part of the 1st Infantry Division. And that had been headquarters, but it was mostly not used. So I think they thought that would be a safe place to put us. Although it was no farther or nearer to Saigon, it was not a good target at that time. So I brushed up on playing bridge, and what I said in that paper was, when you had downtime, what did you do? Mostly just nothing, fooled around, or got in trouble. We were not allowed to take unauthorized flights. The guys in a minute would take us up in the helicopter anywhere we wanted to go. We joked about if our bosses from Saigon wanted to come and see us and it wasn't a convenient day, we would tell the guys not to go get them. They were dependent on us getting their transportation. So we, my good buddy, Pat Bright, I was a good follower. She was a good leader, and she had all these ideas of what we could do. And she thought going to the in-country R&R spot was a good idea. We're not allowed there, nor were we allowed the transportation to get there. So she called up somehow, I guess radio, some of the Robin Hoods that were our home aviation guy, said, what do you think about a trip to, I can't think of the name of the place.
Was it one of the French resorts that were kind of on
Yes.
the coast?
Yes. And a few of the guys said, sure. And set a date, and they came and picked us up, and off we went to a day's swimming at the beach and, you know, just having a good time. We didn't do anything outlandish. But we wasn't allowed. And when we were on our way back, they stopped to refuel in Saigon. A Red Cross woman, one of us, was across the airstrip, and she saw us, and I knew her from my training class. And we thought, oh my God, we're caught, because she was a little Miss Goody-Goody, and she would tell that she saw us.
In Saigon.
Yeah, and indeed she did. So I think we got a talking to begin with, but Saigon was having a change in leadership, and somebody was rotating home that was head of it all, and someone was coming in.
For the Red Cross or for the military?
For the Red Cross.
Okay.
So I think
You got kind of lost in the paper.
I think we got pretty lost. What came out of it for us was they sent Pat and I, TDY, to different bases to work.
So separate these two.
Right. So,
That was the end too.
yeah,
right?
so I
Those
went a
adventures.
week to Cameron Bay.
So you went to, so then when do you go to the 4th Infantry?
Okay, and in April, probably. And that's in the Central Highlands.
So would that be April of 60,
So it would be 68. by then.
68, okay. April 68.
Right, and there really was an upping of the activity in
Do you feel like the troops are?
the mountains.
Mhm.
And, you know, one day we would see all these planes coming in, and a airfield they just put together, and a tent city was up, and, you know, they had more troops here. I think several companies at a time would be there to, maneuvers could be run, and that was all very exciting to see what might be happening. During that time, Bobby Kennedy was killed.
Mhm.
And we all heard from the guys on the helicopter who had headsets and stuff, that he'd been shot. You know, he was my hero. And it was funny because he was the most liked over there. But he wanted the bombing in the north to continue. It was like, you wanted this, but you didn't want that, but, you know.
Mhm.
So I went by, I figured out which was the press tent, and I went over there, and I said, is it true that Bobby Kennedy's been shot? And I was told, come back at the end of your day and we'll tell you. So I don't know if they had the whole word then, or it just hadn't all played out yet. So that was just so weird. Another really weird thing for me was when Washington burned
Mhm.
with the civil rights
Protests?
unrest. I just couldn't imagine that was happening at
Mhm.
home.
Yeah. Well, and the assassination of MLK.
Yes,
Robert Kennedy and MLK are kind of close
very
together,
close in time, yeah.
so that probably brought out a lot of protests.
Yes. Still, I'm not aware of any kind of racial dis-ease.
Hmm. Around in Vietnam, like,
Mhm.
uh-huh.
Um,
Did the donut dollies that you go out into the field and there's a lot of black soldiers, there's no like distinction of like people saying I don't want to.
No, none at all. I was really comfortable with the black guys, and like when they were in the recreation center in a group playing a game, a card game, I would go and ask if I could play with them. And, you know, it just made for good camaraderie.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say was your most popular program that you were able to put on? Like the one that made you feel the best about what you were doing and how you were supposed to be there, and you're like, I really nailed it. Those guys really enjoyed this game.
But you should get Mary Jo and I together, because Mary Jo said, you were such a great programmer. We did so great together, so we could tell you some stuff. But this one particular time was close to Christmas, and we had the Bob Hope show in Lyke. And met Raquel. I zipped up the back of Raquel Welch's
Dress.
yeah. I ate lunch with Les Brown and his band of renown. I didn't know who he was, and he was just really nice. He asked me all kinds of questions, and it was later when he got up and got his stick that I realized.
Oh, that's a big guy.
Yeah, right. So we had a bunch of publicity photos of Raquel. And so the next day when we went on a run, we took those. This was the one time we gave out prizes. And so we told the guys this is what they were going to get. You know, we had a lot of them. And we had one of what we called go boards. You know, you'd ask a question and the answer would be on one of these things laid out in front of you. You had to find it, and someone had to run it up and tag it on the board. Well, we were almost getting overrun when the guys tried to compete with each other to get their
poster.
Yeah, so that was probably the most fun time, and it was a good day.
Do you, can you think of a time where you felt like you really made a difference in one soldier? You know, like, did you get letters from soldiers that wrote to you, or anything like that?
No. Well, I got one or two guys I sort of like dated, but not just to a regular GI, although they would come by and talk to you and tell you nice things about our program.
Mm-hmm. Did you, how were you keeping in touch with your family?
Letters mostly, and we didn't have to put a stamp on it.
It's free mail.
Yeah. And I had a good communication going with my parents, and my grandmother, who lived in Washington, wrote me every week. She worked for the Department of Treasury in a low-level job. Some of her friends told her that she should get a job because that was the patriotic thing to do. And she would send me a letter every week. She wrote it on the weekend and mailed it, and which she put 3 crisp new $1 bills in. And then she cut out of the paper like jigsaw puzzles and other things like that, and interesting things she thought I would like, you know, like the gossip in Washington. So when we were driving back and forth to places, I would read my grandmother's letter. Everybody got a big kick out of that. So I had those open. You know, you could get, what's the word called? There's radio Mars, every once in a while. A guy might call and say, I've got a line open to Austin, Texas. Does anybody have anybody there they want to, you know? And when my parents were in that automobile accident, the guys got a patch through from me to the Pentagon, where my dad was.
Were they okay in the car accident?
They were both, Dad was hospitalized for months, with mostly orthopedic injury. And my mom had a real bad, you know how those horns used to have a piece of metal that went around inside the rim? Piece of the metal got in her arm, so it messed it up. I forget what got me started.
We were talking about how you talked to your family, so you
Yeah.
you got to talk to them when they had
Right.
the.
And so I got to talk to my grandmother a little bit.
Did they? I heard people say that it was kind of an awkward system because you had to say over.
Oh, yeah, and they patched it like from Saigon to Honolulu to Timbuktu, trying to get a patch to near where you live, where it's a local call.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I talked to my grandmother, and she wasn't doing well because she lived in an apartment by herself, and keeping up our house was too much for her. And that's when my mother called for me to come home.
Did you have to go home for the?
Yeah, I went home, they cut me, the Red Cross said when the original message came through about my parents' accident, they cut me orders to go home in emergency at that time, they didn't tell me. And I was close to my Deros date, so I had 2 sets of orders. And it was funny, sometimes this set worked better and sometimes this set worked better. Because if you were going Deros, that had high priority.
Okay, now tell me what that acronym. Say the date of return or.
Deros. Service is the last word. It means you're at the end of your service.
Mm-hmm. But don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying you had 2 sets of orders, and
The one, they give you orders to travel when you're,
contract is
yeah.
up.
And then I had a set of orders that if you were on an emergency.
A family
Mhm.
situation.
Yeah.
But you're saying that you could are they paper orders?
They're paper.
And so you could be like, could I get on this plane? And here's
Right.
this order, and they say no, and you'd be like, well, does this one work?
Yeah, you'd be talking to the guys whose job was to manifest you on a flight. And I missed a commercial flight while I was doing paperwork in Saigon. So the next available flight was a empty plane practically. It had it was a cargo plane. It was as big as the other ones, but they had, besides me, there was a handful of soldiers that were on special things like me. They had seats that came down from the webbed seats from the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and they did have seat belts, but it was freezing in there because
There's
they had
no insulation.
yeah, and there was no body to take up. So that was the first hurdle I had to do, was to get on that plane. And then Okinawa was where that flight went, and it ended, or else it was going to wait 13 hours. So I was looking for another flight to go to Hawaii. And I can't remember what that flight was now. It was a commercial flight. And then when I went from Hawaii to Travis Air Force Base, it was the first time I'd been on a flight or with the families of GIs and kids, wives and kids. You know, I haven't been around those.
You're like, where are the men?
Right. So does that explain it?
Uh-huh.
Then I had to do some processing in San Francisco, and they got me a flight to, I came into Dulles.
So you came back to help your family, help your grandmother, help with your parents.
Yes. I had all three of them in the hospital at one point, soon after I got home.
So because you were the girl of the family, was that
Well,
primarily your responsibility, or?
My older brother wasn't the most reliable guy in those days, and he had his driver's license suspended, so there wasn't much he could do to help at home. My grandmother didn't drive, so I was there and Ken was going into 9th or 10th grade.
Oh, so young.
Yes.
So after you get home, do they transfer you to Walter Reed? Is that how you get to Walter Reed, or?
No, I cut stop service, and later I applied to go to Walter Reed, to go to service to the military.
And did you, was it because you enjoyed your experience in Vietnam so much that you kind of wanted to continue?
Yeah, and I didn't know what else to do yet. I hadn't planned it. And so I thought, well, I know how to do this job. This won't be bad.
And the Walter Reed job was kind of the same thing of like entertaining and
Right,
kind of.
going on the wards, and we had movies that circulated around Washington to different hospitals.
You had to work with the projectors.
Yeah, I learned how to do the projector, and I got good at that. You know, no one uses projectors like that anymore, but I knew how to.
And you could tape them, splice it together and everything. Oh. And then, so you did that for 2 years.
Yeah.
And you hadn't, I think we talked about this, but you didn't have any designs on going abroad again.
Well, when I first signed up, I did. I knew they had Germany for sure, lots of other places I could go. And I thought, you know, I'll do that. In fact, I was a little disappointed I got sent to Walter Reed. You know, it's a home.
Mm-hmm.
So then I rotated through different sections of the hospital, and I rotated to the PNN, Psychiatric and Neurology section. And they were doing really cool stuff, like psychodrama with one of the wards, and you know.
So what is psychodrama treatment?
It's, you're in a group and somebody volunteers to work what their issue is. And the leader, we had this colonel that was strutting his stuff around, and he would set it up, and the premier psychodrama person, whose name I can't think of, but he had an institute in Washington, and this colonel had been to his institute. So then, you know, say I'm the person we're going to work my situation, and then he'd say, okay, who else is in this with you? So I would name someone and I'd pick out so-and-so to be my mother, to be my, you know, so we had, and then we would
Play, act.
dramatically work the situation. And sometimes real insights.
Would come out of it.
Yes. So I was seeing what psychology, behavioral sciences could do, and I thought, that's exciting. I want to do that. So I decided I would go to graduate school in psychology. And having no idea that it was a field that was very hard to get into, I just had some lucky things happen to me along the way. And I had great recommendations from
The Wal-
psychologists,
that you had met at Walter Reed?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then I didn't want to go to Germany because I was waiting for the process of applying to grad school and all that.
Where did you decide to go to graduate school?
Where?
Uh-huh.
VCU.
Okay.
Because there was no fee at that time for the application. Plus it was, near home and it would be less expensive. Graduate school was not a big drain on the pocketbook back then.
Mm-hmm. Did they have any programs for, I don't think they did, but did they have any programs for you because you had served?
No,
No. Okay.
In fact, if I was at a social gathering and I mentioned that I'd been in Vietnam, it sort of was a showstopper. People would stop and ask me all these questions about what I'd done. And the flow of the party wasn't going on. So I, after a while, stopped talking about it. And it wasn't the most popular thing to talk about.
Yeah.
A few of the guys that were in the program I was in had served, but one of them had served in Italy, and one of them had served in another European place that he had gotten great assignments.
Mm-hmm. So
Um,
they weren't combat tested veterans?
Yeah. I didn't know anybody at VCU at that time.
Did you, graduate school is different than undergraduate
Yes.
school, but did you observe any kind of protests or anything at that time? So you got into graduate school, was it in 69, 70? No, you had 2 years at Walter Reed, so maybe 71?
72.
72. So maybe not a lot of, the
No.
troops had been mostly withdrawn.
But I tell you what was going on was the women's movement, and I had hooked up with that.
Uh-huh. So what was more about equality of pay and?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
and just being seen.
And did you, how did you all protest or?
I became part of an organization that was called the Virginia Women's Political Party, political something. And I just started going to meetings, and we had some statewide conferences, and we would invite people to speak, women who were like a dentist or this or that, and get people to come. The woman who did a lot of getting the people to come speak was a really neat black woman who got us what I realized later were like Henry Marsh's wife.
Uh-huh.
That was the dentist. She got a lot of the top tier black women. It was really cool.
Uh-huh. Do you remember her name?
No, but I've seen it
Okay.
since. But, that was exciting.
Yeah.
To
Was it more about equal pay for equal work, or was it kind of about health, abortion, rights?
a little of that, but it was a lot of things. And, that was the beginning, really the beginning of the women's movement, the re-energizing of the women's movement. So I went to a conference. It was a statewide conference at University of Richmond,
Mm-hmm.
where a bunch of the women in the Phyllis Schlafly group came in on a bus we were trying to pass legislation.
ERA isn't, the Equal Rights Amendment, I don't know when.
No, it never got passed.
Yeah, it never got passed, but people are trying to
Yes.
make it happen.
Right. And, we called them anti back then. the aunties came in and wanted to flood our meeting. And I think we got word that they were coming and we changed the location.
There's a lot of espionage, you know,
Yeah, oh yeah.
counter espionage, I
Right.
guess. So wait, you got into VCU and you got your master's in
Counseling psychology.
counseling psychology.
And when I applied, I'd only ever heard of clinical psychology. But I thought, sounds like the same thing, I'll apply here. Because they said they had a new program in counseling psychology. So I applied to that. If I'd applied in clinical, I would never have gotten in. But because it was a new program and it not nearly as popular as clinical, and it turned out it was what I liked. It was working with normal people with life's issues rather than
Psychologically
psychiatric
disturbed people.
hospital people.
Mm-hmm.
So, and while I was in the master's program, they got a PhD program through. And, you know, you can't do much with a master's degree in psychology. So,
You continued on?
I was one of the first 3 to graduate in this PhD for counseling. But all of that, you know, was
We should be
just,
calling you Dr. Stewart this whole
yes,
time.
yeah,
Sorry. Okay, so you were one of the first 3.
to graduate from that PhD program.
Uh-huh. And then you went into practice?
Okay, what did I had to do an internship year to get the degree, and I did that at the University of California, Irvine. So that was an exciting
Yeah.
adventure.
You went all the way out to California?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
people went all over, like residencies and internships in medicine. you
Mhm.
know. I remember the morning the programs were making calls. I'd applied to a number of places. And the first program called me at 7 a.m. It was so exciting to be wanted, you know.
Uh-huh, yeah. And then you did a year there.
Right, and then I came back and I wrote my dissertation, which was really not my thing. It was really hard for me. And what I finally did, there were a couple of years in there. Should have had it done before I went on the internship because I had all the time in the world. I decided I would invite my parents to my graduation, and that would motivate me to get it done. And it did. It was my stroke of genius.
Did you, and then when you graduated, then you went into practice.
Yeah,
In Virginia?
in Virginia, in Richmond. I've been active in the gay rights movement in Richmond too, and there were no identified counselors that were gay. And this man and I set up a counseling service, especially for that, but you know, anyone could come.
Mm-hmm.
And
So who was your partner? What was your partner?
Stephen Linton.
Oh, we have his papers.
Do you have what?
His papers.
For what?
Like his archival collection?
Oh,
like
yeah.
his yeah.
Oh, he was the most creative person in the world. I met him at VCU, and getting hooked to him was really, we bought a couple of buildings right close to Carytown and set up offices in them, and really had, back when insurance reimbursement was much easier than it is now. We were sailing.
So you felt like, do you think of Richmond as a conservative kind of southern town? You felt like you were meeting a need.
Well, I felt like the first year I was here, I went to that 2-year master program. I said, I can't wait to get out of here. And then I started realizing that, you know, I met you here and then I'd see you there. That's nice. You didn't do that in Arlington. You know, it was a lot of good.
Interconnectedness.
Yeah. So after a while I realized, well, you know, this is okay here.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I feel in Richmond, you can meet your own kind of people. So I was meeting the people out on the far left, maybe not real far, but go in that direction. There are plenty of.
And so you enjoyed your career as a therapist,
Yes,
but the healthcare industry kind of made it
maybe.
harder to
They
operate.
wanted to watch you every step of the way. You have to make out your plan, and then are you meeting your goals? Or, you know, they were just on top of us. And by that time, I had established a relationship with Wendy since 1977, and we adopted a couple of kids.
So Wendy is your partner.
Mm-hmm.
Does Wendy have a last name?
Wadsworth.
Okay. And you adopted children.
Yes, and 2 infants. We were lucky there. And
Did you have any trouble, as I assume that you had to adopt them as one person
one
had to,
person had to.
yeah, as a single woman
Yes,
did-
and
because
that-
you were a professional, was it easier?
I think so. And this woman beside her, who had been in the political caucus and was so good, she was a lawyer, and our children are mixed race, and at one point we'd hit a roadblock, and this judge, who she knew personally, wasn't sure that this black child should be, and you know, that was a real important thing in those days, whether white people should adopt.
Well, I mean, they're still debating the indigenous
Yes.
children to this day. So
Yes,
adoption between races is a
yes,
sticky issue.
yes. So she dropped in on him and said, I think you're having some troubles, you know, I'm the lawyer on this case, with whether you want to prove this or not. And he said, well, I only want what's best for the child. And she said, yeah, I understand that. She said, have you noticed in all the reports, this child is well integrated into both families, and named a couple other things. And he said, oh yeah, well, I won't sit on this. And he signed the papers the next day.
Oh, it's helpful to have friends.
It is, it really is. So Wendy, who had graduated from high school in Argentina, she went there as a foreign exchange student, wanted to live in a Spanish-speaking country again. So we're trying to figure out how we could, with our configuration of our family, find a place that would want us. And we're Quakers. And we found this small community in the rainforest of Costa Rica that had started as a school in the community. And so, and I saw an ad in the back of this Quaker journal that says, teacher wanted, and blah, blah, oh, it fit Wendy. And so she applied, and long story short, we got a job there. She got a job there. And the kids were, when we got there, our little girl Mari was 2nd grade, and Max was 7th or 6th. It's hard to tell because he wasn't a student. You could align him different places, different times. So
How long did you live in Costa Rica?
3 years,
3 years.
because, you know, they paid us very little.
So what did you do while your wife taught, or your partner taught?
Yeah, I volunteered at school and was on lots of Quaker committees in the community. And then after a while, I started working for this stained glass artist, and I learned how to put together her designs. And it was really, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, kind of like a puzzle all
Yes,
the time.
yes.
So, had you always been a Quaker?
No, when we got Max, we both had been raised in church situations. And Wendy was Catholic, and she said, "This child has not sinned, and I'm not gonna
Put that.
go that route." And I grew up Episcopalian, which is really pretty okay. But there were some parts of it that I would go to Episcopal churches in Richmond and I'd think, if these people really knew who I was, they wouldn't be so nice to me, was my fear. So I knew Quakers were quite different from that. And so we went and attended and found a home. This one woman who was in the congregation said, at the end of the worship, they asked for people who are new to stand and introduce themselves. And so Wendy and I stood, and one of us was holding Max, and we introduced Max as well. So this woman who was sitting in front of me, who had an old Richmond accent, you would have thought she belonged with a group I was not going to be part of, turned around and she said, "And whose is he?" And we said, "Well, both of ours." She said, "Yes, but which one of you adopted?" And we said, "Wendy." And she said, "I thought so." It was just so affirming to be seen.
Yeah, I didn't know that the Quakers were so
Real liberal.
liberal.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
You know, they were an anti-slavery group real early on, and I think that's where some of it,
Stems from.
yeah,
Well, I'm glad you guys found your home
yeah,
in Costa Rica and Richmond.
right.
So but you guys came back to Virginia, and then did you resume your practice then?
No, I thought about it. I took a job the first year back going one-on-one with a student in Hanover County. We moved into Ashland in Hanover County, and she had Tourette's and something else, and they had won the right to have a one-on-one person. So I got assigned to be with that youngster. She was in the first year of middle school. So I went to middle school for a year. And it was sort of a transition year for me because I got health care there, and my eyes needed, what do you call it? What you get in old age?
Cataract?
Cataracts. So I got surgery in both eyes. A couple of things just fell in. It was poor pay, but the benefits,
Outweighed.
yeah. And then I found this man he originated this company, psychologist, to go into nursing homes. And some of it was therapy, but most of it was doing evaluations. I had stayed away from evaluations my whole life, but you know, this was a way I could control my employment and get a good enough pay. So that's what I did for a couple of years until I was ready to retire. When Mari graduated from high school, or was it college? College. She graduated in the beginning of May, and I retired at the end of May. We didn't need my whole income anymore. Because we had paid her way through college.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so then you could
yeah,
enjoy
yes.
retirement.
Uh-huh.
Well, do you have anything that you wish that I had asked you about your experience in the Red Cross and the Vietnam War that we didn't
No,
touch
I'm
upon?
just really happy you all are doing this, because it's not commonly known. And I think, many women's programs are not commonly known. And I think we deserve to be known, just like WASPs and, all the other auxiliary services that didn't get paid as much or didn't get benefits. So,
Yeah.
and do you know about this? I think it's a blog, I don't know. It's a Donut Dolly, and you have to be invited to be in it. But people in that, women who were Donut Dollies, talk about whatever issues, not allowed to be political, but right now they are, well, first off, this book that came out, Goodnight Irene, was people from all over the country sent in Red Cross reviews of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gotten great reviews. And this guy has won the Pulitzer Prize for other works he's done. So it's really well written. So people were trying to figure out where his book tour was going to take him. And one of the women I know, Jackie in Denver, contacted him because Jackie's mother had been in World War II as a Donut Dolly. And she wanted to talk to him. And so she put the word out, and I think she had 5 or 6 women from that general area who all came to lunch with him.
Oh, wow.
And he really was happy to find out more about current stuff. And so it's an exchange of information and experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is, it's there. I've noticed when in my research that there have been 2 documentaries about Donut Dollies, but it's still, things have happened, but it's still, I feel like, not
It doesn't go
widely known.
anywhere, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know that we're gonna crack the code, but at least we're
We're gonna help it, and I think this book is it may become an award-winning book.
Yeah, maybe it could be a movie.
Yes,
They make movies out of books, all
right,
the time now.
yes.
So, just backing up out of context, how did you feel about the fall of Saigon after, you had been there and come back and you had spent time on the Walter Reed's ward, and then you hear that Saigon has fallen in 75. Did you have any feelings? Did you notice it happening? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I noticed it happening, and I had mixed feelings about it. I don't think we ever should have been there to begin with. So in one way, it's good we were leaving. But darn, we should be able to do something better than that. And we did the same thing in Afghanistan, just as badly. So I don't know why we don't learn from our mistakes. I read a book that took place, I can't remember, it's before partition in India and Pakistan, way before that. And the British Raj was in control, and they decided that they were going to go into Afghanistan and fix things up. Well, they came out disgraced, being fired at as they were going through the Khyber Pass. You know, things that have repeated in history.
Over and over.
Why don't we learn from that? You know, the new guy thinks, well, I know how to do this. So that's why we need more women in there.
Do you think that if you could have served in the military, you know, in a capacity beyond, you know, like,
Yeah,
would you have been
I
up
would.
for that?
I would have. I have 2 uncles and a cousin that are West Point graduates. I wanted to go to West Point. No females at that time. I was rah-rah military at that time. I'm not anymore. I don't think the military is the worst organization. But I'd like to see them put their energy into programs that we help each other here in the United States. And so these young kids could get a couple years of service, doing something worthwhile, and get some skills.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would like to see happen. And I most assuredly would like to be part of that. But I would have been, back when I was young, probably a gun-toting.
You seemed like you were looking for the action.
Yes, yes.